Over the last few years of the 80s, we've seen many classics find their home in Weekly Shonen Jump. And if you watched the last video, you'll know that Jump was pretty much full of hit manga, so where do we go from here? Well, Jump in 1987 gets a little weird, or you could say a little bizarre. Silly jokes aside, let's waste no time and jump straight into Shonen Jump in the year 1987. Starting in the very first issue of the year, we have JoJo's Bizarre Adventure by Hirohiko Araki, one of the more popular manga we've covered so far, that's remained relevant with constant sequels. The JoJo Lands, its 9th part, is still ongoing now. The series started all the way back in 1987 with Phantom Blood, which we'll be talking about today. Contrary to later parts, which would last over 100 chapters usually, Phantom Blood is a quaint 44 chapters long, compiled into roughly 5 volumes. And before I get any comments about it, JoJo was originally just one big manga. The parts didn't really come into play until around Stone Ocean's debut, but we won't get into the nitty-gritty of that here. Now though, they've been recognised as separate parts of one whole series, and for the purposes of these history videos, it makes them a lot easier to track and talk about them individually. So while I might refer to JoJo as one big series here and there today, we'll be exclusively talking about JoJo's initial story, the gothic vampire tale, Phantom Blood. We begin in the 19th century. Through the Industrial Revolution, the development of humankind quickly has sped up, and the wealth gap between the poor and rich has widened. This is a story of two boys who fall into those camps, the young rich boy Jonathan Joestar and the pauper Dio Brando, who has been sent to live with Jonathan and his father due to an old favour being cashed in by Dio's late father Dario Brando. While Jonathan is rough around the edges, he strives to become a true gentleman and seems relatively excited to hear he'll be getting a new brother, but that soon changes when Dio arrives and kicks his dog Danny, and thus begins a multi-generational conflict, tying Dio to the Joestars for decades to come. If you can't tell already or just don't know, I adore Phantom Blood. It's often seen as the weakest JoJo part, and I understand why. It's the shortest, it's the first Araki ever made at his youngest, so it makes sense it wouldn't be good as the later parts, which have more to build off of. But I do believe that it still deserves a great respect, and often people will talk about it like it's just a footnote for JoJo, when it not only serves as a great starting point, setting up multiple ideas and themes for hundreds of chapters to come, but it's also a really strong short horror story in its own right. The rivalry and brotherhood of Dio and JoJo is fascinating to me. They parallel each other really well in both appearance, and things like one being rich and one poor, one being a gentleman and the other a rogue, and ultimately one being good and the other evil. It's also pretty simple in that regard too, but I think that's a strength of Phantom Blood. It's the ultimate tale of good versus evil to start off this amazing saga of JoJo. I don't feel Dio needs much praise, as he's a big fan favourite character. He's charismatic, his evil is infectious and fun, but also understandable since he's reached his own conclusions on how the world works from having a poor and abusive upbringing. Contrasting him, JoJo is naive but well-meaning, and I feel he's often butchered and mischaracterized as being a simple goody two-shoes, which this is something he works towards since he stumbles a lot at the beginning. And I think his naivety is a big character trait of his, not fully realizing how good he has it, and possibly due to that, he could never truly understand Dio, which only heightens the strife between them. There's also an undercurrent of tragedy between the two in Phantom Blood, and I can imagine that there could be a way for the two brothers to put aside their differences, but fate and the Stone Mask has other plans for them. This then sets them both on fairly archetypical paths of the hero and villain, which is another thing I love about both. They're so set in their roles, and sometimes a simple hero or villain is all you need. It would also make future protagonists and antagonists of the series stick out even more, since they stray from being so simple, but the OGs deserve just as much love in my opinion. Another aspect of Phantom Blood that goes under discussed is its aesthetics, setting and theming. It's a period piece set in England, which from all the manga I've covered in Jump so far is pretty bizarre. Araki loves world culture and always wants to find ways to stand out, and I think he definitely succeeded by picking this setting, but the story is constructed in a way I feel that is different from most other manga at the time in Jump 2. It is a clear beginning section that sets up Dio and Jonathan, that has lower stakes and gradually foreshadows what's to come. It's a slow build where we get to see relationships grow and characters growing up. Then in the middle, the powers of the mask are revealed. Dio is turned into a vampire, further leaning into that gothic literature angle. This is also where it embraces more traditional battle shonen elements, where Dio gets some lackeys inspired by real historical figures for JoJo and his new mentors Apelli to fight. And to conclude, we have one big final fight between the two and a final twist ending, since Araki doesn't seem to like things being too straightforward, which I find genuinely moving. The ending, not Araki being weird with his story choices. Despite how much trouble Dio has been and how evil he is, there is this undercurrent of love from Jonathan when he's in the boat together with Dio, and it serves as a very memorable ending that makes me tear up whenever I read it. It just embodies the ideas Araki's trying to impart with JoJo about the human spirit, love, and living. All of this happens within 1987 too. The entire manga ran throughout this year of Shonen Jump, all accompanied by Araki's amazing artwork, being a part of the phase of artists likely inspired by Fist of the North Star, which was exceedingly popular at this time, but it also has a softness and beauty to it too, likely from Araki's fashion influences, which he'd embrace more and more later on, as well as an absurdness which we see in a lot of over-exaggerated scenes, including the gore. JoJo is super gory, by the way, and Phantom Blood is no exception, with it helping to cement the series as a clear horror manga. But no matter how dark the series got, or how many undead and evil beings JoJo faced, light always prevailed in JoJo. We can see this through Hamon, the power of the sun, of life, which extends to ideas of family, which the series would later delve into. JoJo even saving his family at the end. And I think the goodness that is inherent to JoJo is what helped it stay in the magazine, despite it being so weird and off-kilter for the time. It embodied the ideas of friendship, effort, and victory, while maintaining Araki's signature weirdness and penchant for horror, and I think Phantom Blood and JoJo is a worthy heavy hitter of Jump's golden age for this reason. It innovated while also standing proud with Jump's core values. Now, before I finish up with the Phantom Blood section, I've got to discuss some of its adaptations. First off, its first animated venture was a feature film which I'm pretty sure to this day is still lost media, with it only being screened in some theaters in Japan. Alongside this, to celebrate the series anniversary, a PS2 game came out, which I've heard isn't very good, but it looks quite charming and is something I'd like to try one day as a fan of the PlayStation 2. And of course in 2012, JoJo would finally get a proper anime, skyrocketing its popularity in the West and likely being people's first exposure to the series. This is gorgeously animated, and personally I adore the dub since it's fitting with all the English accents, and it's what got me hooked on JoJo originally.
Help me shed this mortal skin!
Mother's mask, but how?
JoJo, your blood is the key!
Oh my god! Father!
Recently, in 2024, it also got a stage play musical adaptation, which seems to be very well received, and again, it's something I'd love to see if I can ever find the means to watch it. Phantom Blood may be the shortest and often most overlooked part of JoJo, but it has received its fair share of love over time, and I'm immensely grateful for that. In the issue following JoJo, we would see Star Explosion debut by Hideaki Hataji, lasting 19 chapters and 2 volumes. This is a manga that touches on the entertainment industry, following a 16-year-old boy called Sugisaku Imagawa, who's training to be a movie star by being an extra in films. He's ecstatic when he gets the role of an extra in a film with his favorite actress, Emily Koda, and through a great stroke of luck, Emily falls out with her co-star for the movie and appoints Sugisaku as her new co-lead. The manga juggles glimpses into the acting world, Sugisaku struggles with keeping up with Emily as an actor, and romance elements are present here too, with Emily previously being in a relationship with her old co-star Shintaro. This made for a layered and complicated romantic drama, which even included mentions of sex scenes which may not have been too appropriate for Jump and its reader base at the time. Furthermore, it seems halfway through it started to focus on other elements like special effects in movies and lost its main dramatic plot for a while before returning to it at the end when the manga got cancelled. 19 chapters isn't the worst of this period of Jump though, and perhaps they were looking for a replacement for Kumegure Orange Road while it was on hiatus, but sadly, it seems this was a bit too mature for the magazine. Pankra Boy, lasting 11 chapters and 2 volumes by Jun Tomizawa, would be the author's final work in Jump, with his previous works Commander Zero and Gakuen Johobu HIP not doing very well. Similarly, this one wouldn't either. It was a boxing manga following the main character Gao Juta, a student who studies hard in order to get a job at a good company, but his father forces him to undergo special training to become a wrestler like him, which Juta dislikes. Upon beating the head of the boxing club though, he discovers he has a natural aptitude for fighting, and gradually becomes a pro wrestling manga as Junta gets acquainted with Jet Pro Wrestling. But by the time he gets a proper match, the manga reaches its end, which is a massive shame as Jun Tomizawa's art is great as always. Juta looks really cool, as does his childhood friend Fuko, who's a tomgirl fighting type character. That kind of sounds familiar. Tomizawa also knows how to illustrate action and ecchi elements well too, and the general premise and first chapter seemed solid, but it likely took a bit too much time meandering around to grip readers. Lasting 11 chapters and 1 volume, Majinryu Varion by Hoshihiro Kuroiwa would debut next in Jump, and this is a manga I've discussed already briefly in my Mecha of Shonen Jump video. Ryuki, the protagonist, inherits a mech called the Majinryu Varion from his late father, a Gundam-like machine which even has a V-fin-like crest similar to most Gundam models. It differs though in that the Varion uses water as an energy source and has a long tail which houses a sword for it to use in fights. Kuroiwa also noted that he was more inspired by Go Nagai's works like Mazinger rather than Gundam as well. When the villains of the story, a group called Halloween, led by the evil Dr. Genius, appear to take the Varian for their master plan of wiping the world clean so only superior humans remain, Ryuki teams up with an android called Alice to stop them. The villains have some pretty cool designs, although it seems only a few out of a planned group were ever fought, due to the manga's cancellation. It's a shame as Kuroiwa built up a whole faction, with there being 10 machine gods being based on 10 different planets. Some names for enemies include Hades Pluto, Tenno Uranus, and Sea King Neptune. Having a mecha manga make it big in the 80s would have been cool too, but as a genre it was always a bit hit and miss in manga form, although Shonen Sunday would begin serializing Patlabor later in 1988, so I wish Jump would have let Kuroiwa cook a bit more. Moeru Oniisan, or The Burning Wild Man, would be another hit from 1988, lasting 188 chapters and 19 volumes by Tadashi Sato, with it apparently coming about after one of Akira Toriyama's color manuscripts couldn't be delivered in time, thus it had 2 one-shots before finally becoming a series. It would be a slapstick gag manga following Kenichi, a boy who, due to his father's carelessness, was washed away by a river and sent deep into the mountains. There he would be rescued and would train under an old karate master, only to return to civilization and his family 13 years later with barely any knowledge of the outside world, which would be the setup for a lot of gags, like him being hit by a train early on. Frequently, a lot of these jokes would be quite brutal, and this would lead to some more combat-oriented chapters in the middle of the manga where aliens would invade Earth, though it seemed to switch its jokes and characters up often, being filled with all sorts of quirky designs. Moeru Oniisan is also one of the perpetrators of a handful of Shonen Jump controversies. Some we've covered already, like the Hirenshi Gakuen or Ultimate Path High School cases. This time though, a chapter heavily featured a janitorial character, with the manga making fun of the profession, which led to some backlash. Jump would issue an apology, recall the issues, and this chapter wouldn't be included in volume releases due to it discriminating against janitors. Despite this, the manga would still persist and have a fairly long run, going on to have 23 more chapters in Jump after trying to reboot itself as the Burning World Man 2. It would also get a 24-episode anime in 1988, as well as two 35-minute OVAs in 1989. In the same year, a game was also released for the NES, with it being rebranded under the name Circus Caper for Western audiences. Alongside JoJo in 1987, we would see another one of Jump's strangest manga debut, Godsider, lasting 78 chapters and 8 volumes by Kojimaki. Last we saw, Metal K didn't do very well in the magazine, but undeterred, Kojimaki continued to push his horror manga idea by incorporating more mythological and religious elements, as well as having a bigger focus on battles. The result is one of the most unhinged Jump manga I have ever read. Godsider sees the forces of Satan. The Devil-Siders try to free him from his age-old slumber at the center of the earth so he can control the universe. But where there is evil, there must be good, which is where the Godsiders come in. Warriors blessed with the powers of the heavens, with abilities strong enough to combat the Devil-Siders in an attempt to save the world. One such Godsider is Riki Kikoku, the son of Satan himself, who fights for the side of good. The manga follows a formula of gradually introducing new god and devil-siders, new bizarre demons for the main cast to fight, with an ever-growing arsenal of special moves which have great silly names, with my personal favourite being the Jesus Flash. Enemies being defeated and turning into heroes is a prominent occurrence, although oddly enough the vast majority of these characters are female, and while there is a lot of bare breast and chest, they're generally pretty cool characters, and I found it a bit less sexist than I initially expected. Godsider was pretty good at keeping me on my toes by throwing curveballs like this, and also by killing and resurrecting its main cast almost constantly. You might have noticed as well that the art is really cool. It's genuinely impressive for a weekly series, and Kojimaki really stepped up his game after finishing Metal K. It also might seem kind of JoJo-like too, and I'm not entirely sure where this stems from, perhaps some mimicry of Fist of the North Star since Kojimaki was an early assistant for it, but briefly, and Araki cites Fist of the North Star as an influence on JoJo, but regardless, I find both of their art styles remarkably similar. They're also both horror-inspired battle shonen too, which both have a lot of gore and over-the-top characters and narratives featuring battles between good and evil prominently. Yet both stayed in the magazine for a good while, with Godsider ultimately ending and JoJo going on to be one of the magazine's longest runners ever. It's a shame Godsider isn't as well known too, as it seemed like a legitimate rival to JoJo with how competitive Jump was in this period. It's wild to me the magazine would keep two very similar series, and in his autobiographical manga series Axed, Kojimaki mentions that editorial told him at one point that it was Godsider or JoJo. The magazine didn't have room for both, leading to a sort of rivalry, albeit perhaps a one-sided one on Kojimaki's part. This manga, series Axed, is something I think people who've seen these videos would really enjoy, by the way, and this is probably the best time to bring it up. It's a 1-volume long autobiography from Kojimaki of his time working on shonen manga, especially the period of time he spent working in Jump. It covers things like Mecha Battler Gilfa and Metal K, which I've mentioned in previous videos, as well as his relationship with other mangaka like Araki and Tsukasa Hojo. They're characterized in really funny ways, which you'll get a kick out of if you've been following their history in the magazine like I have. Godsider is also predominantly featured as well, as is his struggles with the magazine, the editorial process, and his creative desire to make works that don't appeal to what Shonen Jump wanted at the time. I highly recommend you read it as it's fully translated, and I think it's good supplementary material to understand the history of Jump as well as the human side behind the creators and the magazine, which we don't often get to hear about. I'll leave a link to it in the description. Back to Godsider, and while it would eventually be beaten up by JoJo, the journey it took as a manga was wild. I could put any number of random pages from it on screen, and chances are you'll maybe want to read it due to how insane it seems. It revels in weirdness and edge, like having Satan worshipping Nazis, a literal baby villain, the child of two main characters appearing and also using the Jesus Flash I mentioned earlier. Just the Jesus Flash itself should probably convince you to read this manga. It's so goofy. As well as this, there's so much trippy imagery, fun panel layouts and compositions, great hammy designs, and overall it's a wild ride, and I think more people should read this. Kojimaki is one of these authors who isn't very well known or talked about in the West at all, but everything I've read from him has been a delight. And what's weird is most of his works have official English translations, including Godsider. At least for me in the UK, you can buy ebook versions of every volume from Amazon for a pretty fair price. What's more, Godsider also has a sequel series by Kojimaki that started in 2004, which is also partially translated and available, with at least 9 of its 16 volumes up on Amazon as well. A second spin-off or sequel series also exists called Godsider Saga Shinma Sankokushi, which lasted 5 volumes and ran from 2011 until 2013. I really think it goes to show how much Kojimaki loved this series, even continuing it outside of Jump, but I can at least vouch for its original run. I think it's something that more people should at least try if it sounds appealing to you. Tokubetsu Kōtsū Kidōtai Super Patrol would last 16 chapters in 2 volumes by Ryuji Sugihara, returning once again to try his hand at a vehicle-based series, but this time focusing on police. Due to advancements in automobile speeds, traffic violations and crimes have increased, leading to the formation of the Super Patrol. The manga follows a buddy cop duo of Takuro Mizuki and his best friend Masaru Date, driving a motorcycle and squad car respectively. It was episodic and saw them solve problems or deal with criminals in each chapter, with no real overarching plot. But it did have a focus on motorcycles and cars, which was seen throughout, with it going into a lot of technical detail, much like Sugihara's past works, like in Yoroshiku Mechadoc or Roadrunner. While it had some charming art, it ultimately failed to catch readers' interest, being a bit too complicated for younger readers, leading to its cancellation. After a brief break, Masakazu Katsura would return to Jump with a present from Lemon, lasting 19 chapters and 2 volumes. While his last 2 works would be Sentai-style Transformation Hero series, this time Katsura would create a story following Raymond Sawaguchi, nicknamed Lemon, a high schooler with a perfect voice who wants to become a famous singer and idol. His father was once an enka singer yet to break out, and right before he would sing the song he wrote together with producer Gen Osaki, he suffered a heart attack and died. A substantial portion of the manga sees Lemon try to work with Gen becoming his producer but treating him harshly in the hopes to push Lemon to become a real star and doing what his dad couldn't. As well as this, Lemon's childhood friend Maimi Hirokawa also serves to be a love interest as well as rival idol, being the focus of a lot of ecchi elements which Katsura loves to put in his work. While it would get cancelled, it seems that it managed to conclude fairly well in the 2 volumes it had, and as always, the art is fantastic from Katsura. It's a bit of a shame because a story about a boy idol sounds like a ton of fun to me. Kinnikuman had lasted close to 400 chapters, being in Jump close to a decade, with it beginning in 1979 and lasting until early in 1987. But author duo Yudita Mago would still be raring to go after finishing one of Jump's flagship series. This brings us to Yūrei Kozō ga Yatte Kita, lasting 42 chapters and 5 volumes, originally being a one-shot that even got a cover earlier in the year. It follows Momotaroh and Kintaro, 2 yokai who together can merge, forming the Justice Yokai Ashura Doji. While they're in this form, they fight against evil monsters, with the series likely taking influence from manga like Gegege no Kitaro and Osamu Tezuka's Dororo, other monster battling manga that came out before. At the beginning, a mountain erupts, unleashing 108 yokai into Japan by breaking the statue of Ashura Doji. The 2 main characters, twin halves of the statue, are ordered to hunt them down, which they do so at the beginning by joining a school. At the start, the manga seemed to distance itself a lot from Kinnikuman in setting and also in art, with with some of the monsters being genuinely a bit creepy, something Jump and Yudetamago got a few complaints for, apparently from concerned parents. In a way, this first half could mirror modern day shonen exorcism manga in a sense, with the duo taking out various yokai around the school and other places, which are targeting children. As it progressed though, it became more and more battle-centric, with the monsters resembling actual folkloric ones less and less. Wrestling rings gradually seemed to pop up, and it looked like it ended up being about invading Western monsters fighting the Japanese justice yokai. Kinnikuman had been a series that had lasted in Jump for a really long time now. Jump had changed dramatically since its beginning, and this formula being tried again would likely not work, even with Yudetamago's pedigree. It was up against things like Fist of the North Star, Saint Seiya and Dragon Ball, far more ambitious works that really pushed what battle shonen were at the time, and grittier works like JoJo and God started popping up might have shown that there was a bigger pivot to manga like that instead of cartoony wrestling. This isn't something set in stone, but likely a reason why Yūrei Kozō ga Yatte Kita couldn't cut it is because it couldn't adapt to all the big changes Jump was undergoing at the time. The Momotaroh by Makoto Newano would be their debut manga in Jump and go on for 109 chapters and 10 volumes. Despite Kinnikuman ending this year and me saying that perhaps Yūrei Kozō ga Yatte Kita was outdated in terms of its storytelling, the Momotaroh was a wrestling manga that took the concept of fantastical wrestling and attempted the idea in its own way, leading to its success. The Momotaroh was a masked wrestler belonging to Taihei Pro Wrestling, a group filled with wrestlers based on Japanese myth and legend. The series mixed wrestling elements with fast-paced gags, and its simple panel layout and art definitely lead me to believe it was more comedy-focused than serious, although there are plenty of fights throughout the series, with the art and impact to pick up a bit. The series would receive a brief sequel from 2003 to 2004 in Business Jump entitled The Momotaroh Part 2, and a one-shot celebrating the 50th anniversary of Shonen Jump in 2017 was also created. Other than that, it's a small success for Jump in the midst of its golden age. No Side by Takuchiba would see him return yet again, this time shifting from football to baseball and now to rugby, but finding even less success, with the manga only lasting 11 chapters and 2 volumes. This one seems barely of note, featuring a pure-hearted protagonist who doesn't know anything about rugby, so he gets to learn and fall in love with the sport, but I could find no mention of any major events or standout characters. Seemingly, it's just a very forgettable manga about a sport that's never seen much success in Jump, and to muddy the waters even more, while researching for this, I found multiple rugby series called No Side or had No Side seemingly in their name. Otoboke Nasubi-Sensei was a 4-comic gag manga by Yutaka Takahashi that lasted 21 chapters and 1 volume, or it's more accurate to say it lasted 21 weeks since I have no idea how many 4-comic were in each issue of Jump, but there was at least enough to fill 1 volume. The manga followed a dumb and perverted teacher called Nasu Taizo who worked at Vitamin Z Academy. The manga was characterized by perverse humor and simple puns, with a lot of characters being based on various vegetables. The only other real thing to note is that it featured a lot of well-drawn pretty female characters, which Yutaka Takahashi is known for apparently. From my knowledge, Jump has never messed around with 4-comic manga much, so this is an interesting one for the history books, and the debut of an author we'll likely see again a few more times in future history videos. And the final manga of 1987 would be Takahashi Kisaki's Hard Luck, a boxing manga that only lasted 11 chapters and 1 volume. It follows Yuki, a high schooler who hates boxing due to his father, a pro boxer who had the chops to be world champion, dying one day, leaving him to struggle and grow up alone. Despite his distaste for the sport, those around him cheer him on and encourage him to get better at it like his dad, the manga progressing smoothly enough until during the finals of a tournament he's in, he kills his opponent, leading to a lot of fallout. The manga even delving into how the media treat Yuki following this tragedy. He instead bounces back, using it as an opportunity to become a heel boxer, which sounds very interesting, and I wonder if this was a twist ending due to the series being axed so early on. It's not every day you get deaths like this in shonen sports manga, so despite Hard Luck being fairly obscure and not very noteworthy, it had this going for it at least. Now that we've run through all the manga that began in 1987, let's have a look at how healthy the magazine was at the beginning and end of the year. 1987 started off at probably one of the best places Shonen Jump had ever been in, rocking up with absolute classics like Dragon Ball, Fist of the North Star, City Hunter, Saint Seiya, Kinnikuman, Ginga Nageriboshi Gin, and Sakigake Otokujuku. Huge battle shonen that really defined what Jump was, and ones that would be an influence for generations to come. Captain Tsubasa and the new Yamashita Taro-kun would also be doing well in the magazine, acting as strong sports titles. While it was on hiatus at the moment, Kimagure Orange Road would also return soon, being a pivotal rom-com manga. Kochikame, High School Kumengumi, and Sude no Tonchinkan were three big gag manga that had been in the magazine a while now, showing that gag manga were ever popular within the magazine, being some of its most long-running titles. We're then left with a few stragglers. Sekiryo, Sora no Canvas, and Akiten Kyoshi Nashimoto Kotetsu were smaller hits within Jump's golden age of varying genres. And there was also the short-lived baseball series Kirara, the only true dud currently in the magazine. The crowning jewel of the beginning of the year though was JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which was on its first chapter. Up until now, Jump had been building and building in terms of quality, and while the magazine sales would continue to skyrocket, this year would also mark a number of major series ending. Among them, Kinnikuman, the magazine's second oldest manga and a figurehead for Jump, would come to its conclusion this year. High School Kimengumi, a gag manga that if you include its prequel third year Kimengumi would be well over 300 chapters, would also see its end this year as well. Ginga, an iconic battle manga that would have been going strong throughout most of the 80s, would end year 2, as well as Kimegure Orange Road, leaving Jump pretty open with 4 of its biggest manga gone. As well as these, the year saw Sora no Canvas, Sekiryo, Kirara, and Akiten Kyoshi leave the magazine too, meaning it needed some new hits. I mentioned JoJo a second ago, but its rival Godsider would also be a big hit for this year, lasting the entire year, and this exodus of bigger series may be the reason why both were allowed to last so long simultaneously, as Jump needed to recruit some new hits, which would take a bit of time. The Momotaroh and Moeru Oniisan would fill in as new comedy manga with High School Kimegumi gone. They wouldn't last quite as long as the usual long-running gag manga, but would act as decent successes for the year. Yude Tamago's new venture, Yūrei Kozō ga Yatte Kita, wouldn't be nearly as successful as Kinnikuman, but lasting over 40 chapters was a feat in and of itself for the time, so it's a worthy manga to fill up the magazine for sure. We then have a few duds in the magazine, with No Side ending at the very beginning of next year, with 2 more forgotten sports manga joining the lineup soon after in Cosmo Striker and Haruka Kanata. It hadn't been the best year for Jump in terms of old series ending and new beginning, but the additions like JoJo, which would last decades, would be a big boon ultimately for the magazine, and the remaining manga was still going strong. That would include Dragon Ball, which had started to undergo some changes of its own throughout the year. The beginning of 1987 saw Dragon Ball finish up the Fortune Teller Baba arc, one that doesn't get discussed too much, but one I like a ton. Goku and friends need to find the location of the last Dragon Ball, and to do so they must either pay 10 million zeni or beat Baba's 5 champions, which are mostly based on classic monsters, something Toriyama likes a lot. We have a vampire, an invisible man, a mummy, and a devil. All of them have great designs, and the methods our heroes beat them are all very fun or well choreographed. Goku getting hit with the evil beam, and everyone seeing that he literally has no evil in his heart is really funny and helps characterize him well too. The capstone of this arc though is the fight with the mysterious masked fighter who turns out to be Goku's grandpa. The fight itself is very fun, but it's the climax of Goku getting to see him again, even briefly, shedding tears of happiness that really gets to me the most. The 4-star Dragon Ball, like Bulma points out, has drastically changed Goku's life. It's taken him on so many adventures, and now he's surrounded by many friends. I'm not sure Goku is one to get consumed by loneliness, and I don't think Dragon Ball is making an especially big point about it here, but the fact of the matter is that the 4-star Dragon Ball definitely made Goku's life a heck of a lot more fun and fulfilling. It's one last gift from Grandpa, and it's told in a really sweet and understated way, and I don't think Toriyama gets enough credit for some of the emotional beats that crop up in his works. They probably won't bring you to tears, but moments like Goku seeing his grandpa again will certainly make you feel warm inside. And with that, he says goodbye, and we learn the final Dragon Ball is yet again in the possession of Pilaf and company, who now have mechs. That doesn't really mean much though, since Goku beats them with ease, and for his wish this time, he opts to bring back Upa's dad, who died earlier on in this saga. He's a kind boy at heart. Goku's next goal is to participate in the next Tenkaichi Budokai, but that'll be in a few years, so the gang opts to reunite then, after they've gotten stronger. 3 years pass and people grow up a bit. We're introduced to some new characters, the Crane Master and his students, a rival school, Jackie Chun is back too, and we get to see Goku, Krillin and Yamcha easily qualify for their final rounds, but so does this new strong fighter, Tenshin Han. And the first match of this Budokai has him face off against Yamcha. I feel like Toriyama really stepped up his battles in this arc. There's a lot of really fun fights in the 22nd Budokai, and Tenshin Han is a real threat for once. Whereas the last Budokai felt a lot more silly and friendly. That said, we get a classic comedy fight with Jackie versus the Wolfman, who he manages to beat by throwing a bone outside of the ring, and for good measure he manages to de-wolfify him by making him believe Krillin's bald head is the moon. Back to serious fights, we have Krillin vs Chaozu, who possesses the Dodonpa Taupai used, indicating a connection between him and the Crane School. The first half of the fight is a lot more serious, but it ends with the two shouting math questions at each other, which again is really dumb. It's peak Toriyama goofiness. Goku vs Panpu just serves to show how strong Goku is, with him one-shotting him with ease, and then Jackie gets to test Tenshin Han, yet again propping him up as a strong challenger, in which Jackie surrenders to see how he'll fare against his students. Only one of them can fight Tenshin Han, so Goku and Krillin have to fight. It's obvious who's going to win, but Krillin gives Goku a good go, and it's also a lot of fun to see these two friends brawl. And then we get Goku vs Tenshin Han, and I think it's here Dragon Ball starts to really change. The battle is serious, frenetic, both fighters go all out using their various techniques, and at one point Tenshin Han interrupts the cheating strategy that was set up by the Crane Master. He wants to beat Goku with his own prowess. The focus on being better than your opponent, using all your strength and skill to beat them, and overcoming your personal limits is a staple of Dragon Ball, and while that's always been challenged up until now, even in some goofy ways, I think here is where it gets more solid as a theme of the series. The fight goes on, both parties go all out, with Tenshin Han even destroying the arena itself. Goku then has one shot here, so he fires a Kamehameha at him, which sends them both flying off into the distance, but sadly a truck happens to pass by, making Goku's fall to the ground slightly faster. Tenshin Han is then declared the winner. It's a really nice arc, I think maybe slightly better than the first Budokai, but both are very strong fun arcs with a great balance of humor and action. But this arc doesn't end there. As the gang are prepared to leave, they hear a scream. Krillin's scream, and it's then revealed that Krillin has been murdered.
Was that the bite of 87?
And that's where we're going to end the section today, on a big cliffhanger as we enter the meat of the Piccolo saga, which features the Great Demon King himself. With Dragon Ball covered, that marks the end of today's Jump History retrospective. It might not have been the most bombastic year compared to recent ones, but the inclusion of JoJo and Godsider has made this one of the most fun to cover for me personally. There's also some smaller works like Varion and Present from Lemon, which I find really interesting, and the shift with series ending and Dragon Ball going through some great arcs makes this year a bit of a favourite of mine in a way. Next year though, it's going to be big. We need to fill some of those slots big series have left by ending. JoJo also enters its second part, and Dragon Ball needs to address Krillin's death and King Piccolo, so stay tuned and subscribe to make sure you don't miss the next history video. If this is the first one of these you've watched, make sure to check out the rest of the videos in this series, which go all the way back to Jump's beginning in 1968. If you like Shonen Jump, check out the rest of the channel too, where I have another little series going over the magazine's cancelled manga in a bit more depth called the Axe Files. You will see coverage of a lot more newer manga there more extensively. If you really enjoy my videos and would like to support me directly, please check out the Patreon. You can join for as little as $1 a month and I'll thank you in the credits of all my videos, and you'll also get access to exclusive hauls and the Trent Talks podcast, where I yap about the cool manga and media I've enjoyed every month. But for the $3 and above tiers, you'll also get a little doodle as thanks, like the following cool people. Thank you, Kinocha, Cody, Kaizuku Garu, Soracool Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Fako, Yellowtail, and Lay Sloggett. Thank you all for supporting me and what I make. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.